Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in data about KAGURABACHI, chapter number 87. This chapter is titled Phantoms. Ooh, spooky. I'm scared because it says Phantoms. And oh no, the chapter title is written in kanji. That's very interesting and weird. What a weird, interesting way for Takeru Hokuzono to write this chapter title. And at the beginning of this video, I need to come out and say, Hokuzono, I am sorry for making fun of your manga chapter titling game that we have been going on here for a while. I've been covering this series now for almost 12 months straight. I think I started the series on chapter 44 that came out in like the midway point of August of 2024, and at time of recording this, we are like a little past the midway point of July. That's the month we are currently in. I don't know why I could remember things. So I've almost been covering this series for a full year. And during my time doing this, I often really get interested in what chapter titles mean. This happened whenever I covered the series Oshinoko on the channel, really delving into like, okay, what does a chapter title mean? And really, what does it make to have a really good chapter title? So for the whole fact of that, it's like, okay, whenever it came to KAGURABACHI, I looked through and I'm like, oh, chapter titles, that's interesting. And I'm like, I don't know, some of these just don't really make a whole lot of sense at the end of the day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't really know how I feel about all of this. Like, when I've read so many really good manga series with really good chapter titles, and it's like, oh yeah, last chapter I was titled Quickening. I'm like, what does this mean? And I had a commenter in the last video. I should pull up your name, but I'm a little too lazy to do it right now in front of my computer. And also my internet's not being great, so I'd have to stall for a moment. I really don't feel like doing that. But they let me know that last chapter was titled Quickening. I'm also sorry I spelled that wrong in the video version and didn't really feel like going back to fix it because that would have been a lot of extra work for me. I'm sorry, right? I know these videos are edited to the bare bones anyway, but like, still, it would have probably cost that video to go about 2 hours later, and it already did, and I didn't really feel like having to mess with that. But either way, I made fun, like, what is quickening here? And presumably quickening can be a term to mean when somebody starts moving again after a long time. And of course, we saw the Sword Saint started moving again after the events of last chapter. It's like, oh my gosh, he's staying up, that's crazy. And I just want to say, like, Takeru Hokuzono, I'm sorry for making fun of your name game. On the other contrary, Phantoms just sounds really, really cool. And also plays very well into the whole idea of this chapter of KAGURABACHI, which, to be succinct, the whole idea of this chapter of KAGURABACHI is, do you guys remember we have a villain group? Well, we're going to see all of their effects in action here in this chapter of KAGURABACHI. But of course, to remind you guys what happened last time in KAGURABACHI, mainly it was just the whole fact of like, hey, we have the sort of letdown after the conflict of Chihiro versus Samura. Samura's like, hey guys, you end up winning, I will go and help you out. We had a touching moment of like, hey, Iori was able to interact with her father again for the first time in like, I forget the amount of years. I think it's like, what, 6, 7 years? Or no, it's 3 years. That was after Kunishige got axed, when that all big stuff was really going on. And of course, some stuff with the Masumi there. Ikura showed up. Oh my gosh, Ikura MVP, you know what I'm saying? And the very end of the day was to get to the whole point of, okay, the Sword Saint has finally standed up, and the first time in 18 years after he's now muttered like 4 extra words after he just said Magetsumi a little while ago. And the whole idea is now Chihiro and Samura are getting ready to head to Tokyo for the whole idea of, okay, we're going to go help out in this raid on the Kabanagi headquarters. And of course, with all of that being said, I legitimately did not think that we were going to be meeting up with Samura and Chihiro this chapter, and honestly didn't really expect him to come and prepare at the very end of this chapter either, which is pretty good because that prediction was right, because we do not see them at all this chapter, which I think is very much to this chapter's benefit, not to mention, we know a villain group, right? But of course, this chapter starts off in a little bit of an interesting way. This seems to be happening sometime in the past, a little long time ago, where we see a certain member of the Kabanagi going through, and he's looking through the archives that they have here. And from what I know, this isn't any sort of specific member that we know or anything. I think this is just some guy who Hokuzono has created for the sure purpose of, like, taking a look at all of this various information to build up the whole idea of these phantoms of the Hashaku, right? But we see this guy's going through, and he pulls out a book off the shelf that has the name of Hishaku. And pretty much all it says is like, hey, 15 years after the war, Kunishige Rokuhira was murdered. And we then see an addendum to this little bit of a tale that a small group composed of 10 sorcerers, led by a man named Yura, and his goal is to kill the Swordmaster and wield the Shinichi. Of course, this is what Hirohiko ended up telling Chihiro and the events of chapter number 54, right? And of course, that is really all there's written on this page about the Shaku, being that they really have no information on these people, right? We also understand that these are people whose names are not in any sort of family registry whatsoever, and their sorceries also comes from outside of the dominant lineages. And I find this idea really, really interesting, of the whole idea of, like, we have these specific lineages where all of these various sorcery comes from, because at the recording of this video, I've been rewatching the anime series Black Clover. Just a little bit of one of those things like, hey, I want to relive this series again. It's been about probably 5 or so years since I first watched it, and I'm like, hey, let me go back through and re-experience the anime. And a really interesting thing about Black Clover is the way their magic system is sort of built up. It's not really like a Kagurabachi sort of take on it, being like, hey, we've got this whole idea of, man, people can only use one type of sorcery, but inside of that sorcery or magic power, you can use all of these various spells and everything. While in Kagurabachi, it's really like, your sorcery sort of has one purpose, but of course, with that single thing, you can do a whole lot more. Whether or not you have the power of the Rakuzachi family, not Rakuzachi, the Sazanami clan, and you're able to use the power of Iso or Storehouse, that's only really one direct power, but there's different ways to branch off that. Of course, Hirohiko's Blood Crane sorcery. He can do that, but there's a lot of weird things in how it works, right? And of course, like, hey, we know all of these other characters' sorceries, but they only have one direct thing. Shiba, he can teleport, but he can do and teleport in very interesting ways of, like, moving his foot down to crush and interrogate somebody, right? There's a lot of very interesting ways you can play with all of this, and I just thought this idea of, like, hey, dominant lineages, pretty interesting at the end of the day, right? But the narration just continues saying, like, hey, a wide age range, the skills to pull off the assassination of Kunishige Rokuhira. And Ahoy is like, man, who are these people? The members' relationships to each other and their backgrounds, almost everything about them, is shrouded in a thick fog. We then get the chapter title of chapter number 87, titled Phantoms. And honestly, it reminded me of, like, this would be the anime sort of whole thing of, like, we start this out at the beginning of the episode, who are the Hashaku, all of this, and then just, like, the screen comes through, Phantoms, and then we cut to the events of the actual episode. And of course, here, we see the events of what's currently going on in the Kabunagi headquarters. As we see what's currently happening in the threat elimination grounds, as we see that Azami has just completely defeated the Samurai Shaku dude. We didn't really see any bit of the fight, but all we see is that this guy is just laying on the ground. All of the stone and rubble around him is just broken, shattered, like a bunch of force has been thrown onto it. And we see a lot of blood coming from this guy. We specifically see a lot of blood on his free arm that's not covered up by any clothing or anything. And it looks like there's a lot over by his right shoulder, which we don't know if that blood is directly coming from there or if it's just like, hey, this is where he killed the Shigu brothers earlier, and this is just where this guy ended up landing. But it really doesn't look like this guy is doing very good. And it does look like Azami is winning due to Azami even thinking like, man, this is just really creepy. Something feels off. As we get a close-up of the Samurai Shaku's face, as Azami just thinks like, hey, we know that 3 enemies entered this room here, but the other 4, like, they've yet to be seen, all things considered. Like, hey, they still haven't come into this room, and they can't get down to below all of the areas without passing through. And he's like, wait, don't tell me. As we sort of get the whole idea of maybe this was just a distraction the entire time. We now cut back over to where Arua and Hakri are currently in the underground at level 5 of the Kabunagi headquarters. Of course, they are currently trying to fend off 2 of the former Kabunagi members, one of them who we know uses transformation sorcery. Of course, we saw him transform into Kudo here a little while ago. And also the whole idea of the very long-legged woman, long-legged and long-armed woman, who sort of wields those blades and has, like, those really interesting, like, greaves of, like, spikes going through them on her arms, right? And Aruha just says, like, hey, of course, this is these Hashaku guys. All they do is use pawns, and they avoid taking on any risks themselves. They eventually wear the enemy down and swoop in at the very end. As, of course, he remembers to the raid on the Kokugoku Sanzo whenever he was there, and like, oh man, all of those Danseki hired hands came in to fight, and that ended up pretty much making whenever the Hishaku did come in, well, we saw that pretty much all of the Kokugoku Steam Squad got wiped out very effortlessly, right? And Haruha just thinks about things like, no, not again. He's like, you bastards, right? As we now cut back over to the Kabunagi headquarters, floor 1, right outside of the threat elimination grounds, as we see 3 characters who we have not really ever seen before. I say not really because we have seen the silhouette of one of them before, and also somebody else we know. Oh wow, is that a Hishaku member? Oh wait, one of these guys has the Hishaku sign right on his hand, right? As we pretty much see 4 Hishaku members sitting down at a little bit of like a coffee table, like a waiting room in the Kabunagi headquarters. And of course, we see 2 Hishaku members we have never seen here before. We see Talo. This was the guy who we saw to be the partner of Hirohiko a little while ago. I have dubbed him Talo just because he looks like a tall guy pretty much, right? And that's pretty much where my basis of his name came from, right? We see this other guy who's got this very interesting head style. He seems to be mostly bald, besides for a little bit of like a really weird comb over on the side of his head, parting down onto the right side. And we get a good look at the left side of his face, and he has this really weird sideburn positioned right in front of his ear. And it's really weird because we don't ever see this guy's face of like really his full design in any great way. We just mainly see that he's just sitting here and he looks really weird how he's positioned here in the moment, right? So we'll be very interested to see how this guy looks whenever we get a full look at him. And I hope that we learn his name soon because I don't want to have to make up names for all of these people, right? We see this other guy who pretty much has like some small like scruffy hair, right? He looks like the most normal out of all of the people here. And we see that he also has like one of these medical bandages things on his left cheek, as we see that he's pretty much like is just like yawning like, oh boy, right? And we then see the other Kabunagi member here, not the other Kabunagi, our Hishaku member here, is the Lady Hishaku who we saw before, that presumably went through and helped murder Kunishige Rokuhira. Of course, we knew that the Hat Shaku was one of those, this girl, and of course the Samurai Shaku were the 3 who launched that raid there in the moment, right? And we see that she's like, oh boy, like, what's wrong? Are you nervous over there? And the boy who's yawning is just like, no, I'm not at all, right? She's like, oh, well, you yawn. Like, that's proof that you're nervous. He's like, hey, baloney. I'm not the only one yawning. You hear this, right? As we see that the other guy who has the really weird comb over is just like, oh, he's also yawning also. He's like, hey, I'm not the only one. He's actually just sleepy over there, right? And comb over's like, oh, yeah. As Talo turns around and says, oh, hey, look, that's Yura. He's finally showing up, right? And pretty much we just get this whole idea, the word Lady Hishaku's like, oh, he's nervous. Like, would you look at that, right? Talo's like, oh, but like, what if he is nervous? And the boy's like, hey, I'm not nervous whatsoever, all right? As we see that Yura finally enters a room, and we see that he walks up to all of his friends. And we then look to the opposite side of the room, where there is a little bit of a service desk with a singular lamp on it and a very old guy sitting at the desk, right? As Yura says, like, oh, hey, excuse me, old man. He's like, hey, would you mind pointing me in the direction of the restroom? You're Kabunagi staff, right? So you should be able to help me out. And we see the old man just like, oh, yes, that is why I'm here. And Yura says, oh, well, I'm pretty sure I remember there being a few other Kabunagi members in here, but it seems like they hid whenever we came in here, right? And the old man's like, oh, yes, we were actually advised to, right? And Yura says like, oh, but like, what about you? Are you not afraid to die or anything like that? And the old man just goes like, oh, no, not at my age. I just wanted to get a look at the guys who killed Rokuhira. And Yura's like, oh, okay then. And he's like, what do you think? And the old man just is like, oh, there's not a lot of surprises at my age. I was hoping to see some rare monsters. Honestly, a bit too bad. You're a bit tougher than the average thugs, but nothing really out of the ordinary. Phantoms? Oh, you're hardly that. Just crafty and good at sneaking around. He's like, I have nothing to tell you. Just proceed through to the threat elimination grounds. And at this point, Yura pretty much goes into his suit jacket pocket and reaches around in there, and he's like, oh, well then, like, here, I have an idea. As he pulls out a coin out of his pocket. And we have some kanji on here. I don't exactly know what they say, but we see the designer of this coin seems to be a wave of some sort on the ocean rippling about, right? As Yura just is like, okay, it'll be a simple coin toss. If I win, you'll direct me to the restroom, okay? And the old guy asks the very obvious questions of like, oh, and if I win? And Yura says, well, simply, you can just take my life. And the old guy's like, oh, what? I'm sorry, I don't think I understand this. Yura also pulls out a tiny blade and sets it on the little bit of a counter, the service desk here, and just like slides it over to the old man and says like, hey, I'm the ringleader behind Kunishige Rokuhira's assassination. And if you win the coin toss, you'll go down in history. And the old guy just is like, oh, but like, why would you do that, young man? As Yura just is like, oh, we're about to risk our lives. And before we do, well, I just like to relieve myself. And the old man's like, oh, well, find the bathroom yourself and just leave me out of it. Well, Yura doesn't really pay attention to any of this and flicks the coin up in the air and holds his arm out. It falls into his hand and he covers it up, of course, as a traditional coin toss goes. And he then just looks to the old man, and the old man sort of pauses for a second and eventually just goes, oh, tails. As we see that Yura lifts up his hand, and the old guy is just staring at the coin. As we see, he lifts his hand off the coin and heads one at the very end of the day. Of course, this means that Yura can use the bathroom. This is what we all needed my guy to do, right? As now, it's honestly a very rough transition, as we cut over to what presumably is a shrine or like an entrance that's like sealed off in some sort of like weird way. Like, we get a lot of energy of like this doorway and all of these like various like big ropes that you often see at like Japanese shrines, and like these like broom handles like hanging, or the broom ends like hanging down from on them and everything. And we just look farther and farther into this doorway, as we then see that Yura's eyes almost seem to go like a little bit black, as like his white inner eye like stays that color, but like the rest of his eyes darken around this area, right? As Yura's like, oh, I knew it. Today the gods are on my side. And the old man is just like sweating here in his seat and just points like, oh, the restroom's that way, young man. Yura pretty much is like, hey, thanks, old man. And he's just is like, oh, wait, I'm sorry, boy, but like, what's with you? And Yura's like, oh, am I now suddenly living up to your expectations? As Yura starts to proceed to the restroom, as we see the one young boy of the Hishaku gets up and says like, oh, hey, okay, boss, I'll go too. As we now cut to both of these two peeing in the urinals in the Kabunagi headquarters, as we see that Yura's doing it, and the young boy's just like, oh, like, dang, I can't go right now, right? And Yura's like, oh, hey, are you nervous? And the guy's like, no, but like, hey, do you get nervous, Yura? And Yura's like, oh, like, sure, I especially do. Especially today, I mean, we might die after all. But Yura's like, hey, but here's the thing, I don't hate it. Nervousness precedes victory. And he just says like, hey, besides, there's nothing to worry about. You're the strongest fighter in the Hishaku. As we just get a very good look at the boy's face here in a moment, and presumably, he's the strongest. That's pretty good to know, right? But we then just get a look at the boy sort of looking down to the ground, being like, oh yeah, right? Well, at this point, him and Yura end up getting back to the area of the main, like, lobby area where all the Hishaku members are waiting. And we see that Talo is pretty much kneeling on the ground and painting a mandala around all of the chairs and the coffee table that they were sitting around earlier, right? And Talo just is like, hey, the inside's intact, there's a little bit of like a confusion going on, but even with all of this, I can only create the tiniest opening for all of us. And like, hey, there's really no time for us to pick and choose our coordinates directly, so we might end up face to face with an enemy, right? Comb-over's like, hey, bring it on. And we now look, and it doesn't look like he has a comb-over anymore. I don't know if it's like his tie that makes it look like he has a comb-over or something like that. Honestly, now looking at it, that's exactly what it is. He is a completely bald guy with just the sideburns right next to his ears, and it's his tie just looped up over his head. I now see this. I am a little bit smart, right? But we now see, I guess I'm going to call him Baldy, because what else is he, right? But Baldy's just like, hey, bring it on then, right? As we now cut around again to the Kabunagi headquarters, underground at level 6, the Force Field Core. This is where Izuru was talking with, of course, all of the force field attendants and all of the various people, right? And we see that Izuru is saying, like, hey, if we can weather this ambush, it'll be the perfect time to do a sweep of all the Hishaku members. Of course, this is the whole idea that we got a few chapters ago, right? But as this happens, we now cut back up to Yura, where he's like, okay, 10 seconds, 9, 8, clocks start to, like, tick around everywhere. And as this is happening, we see one of the force field attendants who is around the main guy in the force field, pretty much as we learned a few chapters ago, pretty much like people to either switch off or stabilize the pull around them. We see this guy sort of, like, glances up at a clock here in this room, right? And he sort of, like, glances up, and of course, his gaze meets Izuru's. And Izuru's like, oh, hey, like, what's wrong there? And the guy's like, oh, there's nothing, like, whatsoever, right? Obviously, like, not making it clear that there is something going on. We cut to Yura counting some more. 7, 6. The guy's sweating even more as he's watching the clock move back and forth. And Izuru's like, hey, are you concerned about time at a time like this? We now see Yura's like, okay, 5. As we also see this force field extra is just sitting here, it's like, damn it, like, I can't hold out anymore. As he starts to let go on the entire barrier here in the area. Of course, the main sensory guy sort of notices this, and Izuru does too, and he uses his bead sorcery to pretty much go through and blast this guy over against the wall. As Izuru is like, hey, is everything okay? And, like, he looks over to the main protector guy, and the guy's like, hey, there's a blip in the system, but I ended up restoring it here at the end of the day, and it was just for a split second, like, only a second. But we see in this time, all of the members of the Hishaku have completely disappeared. As we now see Hokuri and Iruha here in the area. As we see as they're walking around, all of a sudden, a forced circle appears behind Hokuri, as all of the Hishaku members explode out of the mandala. As we just get a look of all of them back to back to back, Yura included here in the moment. 5 of the 10 members of the Hishaku, 1/2 of the force, all here. As Talo's like, gosh, like, this isn't the time we said it would happen, right? And the lady Hishaku's like, hey, but you adjusted it, right? And Talo's like, yeah, well, we're just gonna have to pick up the pace a little bit, right? As we see, they all settle, and Iruha then notices all of this happening, and he turns around and he's like, damn it, like, it's a Hishaku, right? Hokuri notices too, and just is like, that emblem, it's a Hishaku, like, with this many of them here, right? As we now see that Iruha just is like, hey, it's alright, I'm armed and ready this time. As Iruha pushes Hokuri back a little bit. And we then remember to a long, long time ago, whenever Chihiro and Hokuri were first on the train, getting ready to go head to meet Iruha, right? And Chihiro just told Hokuri, like, hey, normally there's only one kind of spirit energy in a person's body. And if you steal with an eternal contract with an enchanted blade, the price you pay is losing your original sorcery. And we then remember to, of course, whenever Iruha first woke up after being Suzaku'd due to Tobimune and losing his blade and breaking the eternal contract. The whole idea of your whole nervous system is trying to regenerate after being distorted for 18 years. And Iruha just says, like, hey, it's been close to 20 years, but I can help. As we see that he looks directly at Yura and just remembers all of his buddies in the Kokugoku Steam Squad, as Iruha just says, like, hey, it's finally my turn. As he holds up his finger in front of him, getting ready to cast his innate sorcery for the first time in a long time. And that's where we end this chapter of Kagurabachi, chapter number 87. Now, the one thing that I think would make this chapter a whole lot better is if we knew the names of some of these Hishaku members who we get introduced to in this chapter. Learning the name of the old man, yeah, it doesn't really matter in the slightest. Not knowing the guy of the main sensory guy, whatever, we're used to it at this point. At least we know Izuru's name now, right? But now we're in this situation where, okay, it seems like next time we're going to have a battle between Iruha sort of protecting Hokuri using his innate sorcery. As for what his innate sorcery could be, I have absolutely no idea in the slightest, like, yeah, I just have no good idea at all, right? But of course, we know all of these Hishaku members are here, and besides from me calling him Baldy, Talo, Yura, I don't have any good names for these other 2 members yet, and presumably, this is going to be a large out fight. I hope that we learn some of these guys' names, and presumably also learn a name of this guy who is the strongest, right? Again, this is a very interesting chapter. I like getting very focused into the Hishaku, and Yura is just a very interesting character. Of course, we see that he's very cold and calculated, sort of walking through and making this little bit of a bet with the old man. And at first I'm like, okay, does his power maybe have to do with something like gambling or something like that? But it honestly doesn't seem like that. It honestly seems like more of a mind trick at the end of the day. Like, maybe it's something very simple to where the coin on both sides says heads or something. So, and the old guy just didn't know that, and Yura sort of like gets a power rise out of this and just feels better after the end of the day. And also, it's just like pure comedy to see both Yura and the strongest in the Hishaku both go to the bathroom. The guy's like, dang, like, I can't go. I'm like, I'm just too nervous, right? And this whole idea of, like, what's nervous and all this various stuff, like, being nervous for something in the anticipation because it's going to be a big thing that's happening. Honestly, I think it's a very good chapter going through. And, of course, the whole idea of these phantoms here in the moment. We also have the moment of, oh, look at this. Azami beat this guy. And, of course, we know that Ichiki, who is the old geezer guy of the Kabanagi, also helped fight him, which is like, okay, that's weird. Like, is he going to be the boss in here now? Is he actually the traitor, as a lot of people have been thinking? And it's one of these things where it's like, there are so many plot lines opened up in this chapter, I feel. And honestly, I'm just completely here for it because on one hand, it's like, this is a really cool thing that we're getting right now. And of course, the whole page spread, I've seen a lot of people on Twitter being like, hey, whenever all of our heroes are pretty much coming together in the moment, like exploding into the scene, most people would think that they are the heroes. But we know otherwise. They are the biggest villains that we know in this universe. I say biggest villains, the Sword Saint is definitely a very evil guy. But at the end of the day, are the Hishaku really the evil ones? We know their goal is for Yura to go through and kill the Sword Saint to, of course, go through wield the Shinuchi to pretty much get rid of the malediction. And we know, really the only thing costing that right now is the lives of 3 people. We know Aruha's breaking free from the sorcery, Misaka is dead, so Subaru, the pink bear, and Samra are the only people who'd be left. Is it worth killing them so Yura achieves his goal? It's really fun mind games we're playing here in Kagurabachi, and I just can't wait to see where we go next time. We're seemingly going to get Aruha's sorcery. I figured this would happen, being that, like, hey, Aruha no longer has a blade, so he has to fight somehow. I'm honestly, like, at a very big loss for what his sorcery is going to be. He really holds up his fingers in the same way that we always see Shiba do whenever Shiba's getting ready to teleport, with the big distinction of he's only holding up his pointer finger and not his pointer and his middle finger in front of his face. And as far as I know, I don't really know if we've seen too many of our characters in Kagurabachi sort of assume this stance before they're getting ready to use their sorcery. If anything, what is my prediction for Aruha's power? Based off of nothing alone, I think his power has something to do with water. I think that'd be pretty cool for Aruha could, like, manipulate water. Maybe that's why he was at the Kokugoku Steam Squatter. Maybe his original sorcery was, like, to produce heat or something like that. I think that'd be pretty neat, but yeah, honestly, I don't have too much else to say. A really good chapter of Kagurabachi. Probably a solid, I don't know, 7, 8 out of 10. Really, just this is a chapter of Kagurabachi opening up a lot more questions than we had answers before. What is going on with Azami and the Samurai Shaku and Ichiki in the room here with the Samurai Shaku? Did they just, like, win? What is going to be the bigger twist here? Are we going to see any part of that battle? Oh, what is going to happen with Aruha's sorcery? What is the deal with all of our members of the Hishaku? Are we going to see this old guy again? And of course, when are Samra and Chihiro going to enter this battle and pretty much interact with everybody else? I have a lot of questions, and I think they're probably going to get answered very soon. Probably most of those questions will be answered before Chapter 90, or at least the what is Aruha's sorcery. We will probably be getting that next chapter unless we cut away to somewhere else. But yeah, for all that out of the way, just thank you guys so much for watching this video on Kagurabachi chapter number 87. I am pretty sure that I have rambled on for a very long time about this chapter, but my bad, you guys didn't have to watch all the way to the end, but I thank you very much if you did. If you want to hear my other thoughts on Kagurabachi, well, there's a few ways you can go through and do that. Of course, like I mentioned earlier in the video, I've been covering Kagurabachi for a long time here on the YouTube channel. Just go to @Glowplasma, and you can check out all of my various things there. And of course, there'll be a playlist link down in the description box of this video and also on the end card of this video of all of our Kagurabachi chapter reviews. I'm also part of a podcast called the Kabanagi Headquarters. It is a Kagurabachi-focused podcast where we really delve more into these chapters and also go off on a lot of side tangents and also just talk about everything happening in the world of Kagurabachi. So go check out that video. Let me also mute Discord here in the moment, right? But go check out that there. And yeah, really, I don't have any other ways to let you know about how to see my thoughts on Kagurabachi, but besides for coming back next week and seeing what I think about chapter number 88, I think that'd be pretty neat. Again, this is chapter number 87, titled Phantoms, and yeah, I will catch you guys next time. This will be Glowplasma 231, signing out. Aruha sorcery may be pretty neat. I'll catch you guys next time.